Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast, The Old College Try. I'm Peg Keough, joined by my special guest, Mike Hinderman. Mike is the Director of Scholarships at the University of Oklahoma, as well as a CAP financial expert. Today, we're going to talk all about appealing merit scholarships. I'll be getting all the inside scoop from Mike about how OU handles merit appeals and also just best practice in general to submit a successful appeal and a lot more. Stick around. We're going to share a lot of information that your family really, really needs. All right, back again. My buddy, Matt Carpenter, is off doing his own thing today, taking a good break, and I'm super excited. I've got one of our CAP experts here, Mike Hinderman, and we're going to do an intro in a minute. He helps us on the side, actually, working with parents, which we are so appreciative of. But his main gig is at University of Oklahoma, Go Sooners. He is the director of scholarships there. So we are going to super excited today to talk to him, kind of get the behind the scenes, behind the curtain, if you will, info all about merit appeals. And so we'll get into that in a minute. But Matt and I forgot last week to do our song thing that we always do. The two of us flip-flop back and forth. I asked Mike if he wanted to do it, but he's like, no, I want you to do it, Peg. So I was supposed to do it last time, and both of us just spaced. So I have an album, but really my favorite song on the album. So the band is the Jayhawks. So if you haven't heard of them, look them up. They're not brand new, but they're not like super old from when I was a kid way back when. If Matt was on, he'd say in the dinosaur age, right? But the song is called Rainy Day Music. Really, really good song. And the song is Save It for a Rainy Day. And the album is Rainy Day Music. So there's a lot of good songs on the album, but that's the song is Save It for a Rainy Day. So when you have time, if you're into music, go check that out. And maybe I'm hoping that's a new band for some people. So kind of broaden your horizons. That's awesome. So, okay. So I just have to say, because of my, college football mania that I have right this time of year. Sorry about the game, Mike. That was pretty rough. I was thinking of you.
It's okay. It was a tough one to watch, but it's all right.
Yeah. And as I said to you in the green room, my Hoosiers, they shellacked Bama for you. So anyways, life
Sooner
goes
Nation
on.
appreciates the Hoosiers for that.
Yes. And I thought it was so funny, like on game day, Nick Saban, he called Alabama. I'm like, dude, you really I know it's hard for you to be objective, but he was wrong on that one. But
Yep.
anyways, the new season, it's so funny. I feel like I'm so sad when it's over, and then all of a sudden it's summer, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's almost time for college football. It comes around, but we'll have to have March Madness and a lot of other things before that.
Mm.
Okay. So as I said, Mike, he's at University of Oklahoma. You guys call yourself OU. I always think that's funny, like OU and like Colorado is CU, but you're at OU. You're the director of scholarships. So why don't you just take a minute, share a little bit about your background and what you do there now?
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks first for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh,
The
sure.
opportunity. So I appreciate it. So I'm the director of the scholarship office and have been for the past 4 years. And that involves different things, but one of which is sitting on the scholarship appeals committee. And prior to that role, I led the Money Coach program for about 5 years. That was a new program at the time. There's been a little bit more across the country that have grown since that, but we did financial planning and financial education. So we would sit down and see students and families and walk through building out a financial plan, but then executing the financial plan. And so absolutely loved doing that. I also currently teach at OU and I oversee the personal finance class on OU's campus. So very much enjoy personal finance, enjoy higher education, value those things, and can definitely nerd out to any personal finance subjects. And that's
Oh my gosh. I'm like, when you first told me you did that, I was like, oh, I love that because being a financial planner, I'm just like you. I'm such a nerd. And I
Mhm.
love that there's a personal finance class. I mean, I think that needs to be at the high school level.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just so important for that to be ingrained in people. And now when the kids become adults, like they understand. It just helps them navigate their life. But I love that OU does that. I love that you would actually sit down with people, and because I think it's really hard for people to navigate this whole process, and there's such an emotional piece to it. And we're just
Mhm.
talking, even if you're an in-state student in Oklahoma or where I used to live in Washington, it's big bucks, even as an
Mhm.
in-state student with room and board. It's just so I love that
Mhm.
OU, shout out to OU for like having that and valuing it
Mhm.
and offering it. I think that's great. All
Mhm.
right. So appeals in general. We did a podcast, Matt and I, a bit ago about early decision appeals. And that was very specific, some of the stuff we're going to go deeper here on merit appeals. But we did that specifically for that timing because kids were getting award letters and stuff. Now, award letters, these financial aid award letters are coming from the colleges. If you're accepted, you get this from the Office of Financial Aid, the award letter that has the whole package on it. And this is when early action and the regular decision kids down the road will be getting these. And then there's the appeals. This is a step in the process. We've said this over and over again. It's not gonna hurt your admission. The college isn't gonna say, how dare you? We don't want you. We're rescinding admission. None of it. It truly is a step in the process. Many times it can be a very successful step if families take it, and sometimes families don't even know they can do this. So we're shouting it from the rooftops. We help thousands of families every year do this successfully. So that kind of puts it in its place. So there's two kinds. There's the merit, so the non-need based aid. We typically call them scholarships. Some colleges, to make it confusing, will call a need-based grant, is what we call it, a scholarship. So it's very important when you get those award letters to know, is this a scholarship from OU or is this a grant? Do you guys use the term, do you use grant for need-based and scholarship for the merit?
We don't. We use scholarship for all of the awards, and we leave grants to when you think of the Pell Grant or an Oklahoma tuition aid grant. We separate those two things out.
Yeah, see, so that's a perfect example for our listeners. Like, not all schools use, so that's why it's really important to know when you're looking at that financial aid award letter, and sometimes it's pretty obvious because if you get admitted, we'll just keep saying, oh, you admits you and says, congratulations, you got a XYZ scholarship. That's merit because Office of Admissions is offering it to the student. When you get that package, if there's something that's called scholarship, it's on top of the merit, then that's a good indicator that it's need based. But if you have any doubt, reach out to the college so you understand, because the need based, you get a new job, you double your salary, that most likely is going to go bye if, depending on your situation, or at the very least, it'll be reduced. So it's important to understand the differences. So tell me about one other thing before I go there, the understanding the award letter within our software, mycap.collegeaidpro.com. Super easy. You just need to have a soft copy on your computer, which almost everybody does. Easily upload it into our software. You hit this button that says translate, and we'll tell you. So you don't have to worry about calling the school or wondering what's what. So just keep that in mind. Let's talk about you and your school, Mike, and get your insights here. So you offers merit scholarships, right?
That is correct.
And is
Mhm.
it a pretty, like, just tell me high level, like what you
Yeah,
guys offer?
it's mainly straightforward. So we try to be very transparent. So when we think of merit scholarships, it's what are the academic markers, right? GPA, test scores, and we have a system that automatically awards that. So students find out right away with those. Now there's the occasional merit based, like leadership based. Those are few and far between. But when we think of are you getting dollars if you're coming to OU, in general, those are going to be automatic. They could be called scholarships or tuition waivers, but it's pretty be consistent.
Yeah, yeah. So I love that, the automatic piece, because that's what we're all about at CAP, is like transparency for families. So that's great. And some schools are not automatic, right? It can be very opaque. And a lot of state schools, and chime in if you disagree, they don't really offer a lot of merit. So, especially to an out of state kid, it's just not there. So, even if you're 4.0 perfect SATs, right?
Right. Yeah. A lot of state schools are, they have the constraint of we can't waive too much tuition, right? Because that hurts our revenue, but we want to get students in. So they're in this balancing act and they can't make the same offers that privates do.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So you guys accept appeals, obviously, because you said you're
Mhm.
on the committee. And just so our listeners know, colleges really aren't allowed to say we don't, and some schools still have it on their website. They're really not allowed to say that. But even if they're not allowed to, they can always not entertain appeals. So not all schools are very open to appeals. So tell me just purely on the merit side. So what would a student do if they wanted to appeal a merit scholarship, or they didn't get a merit scholarship, but they'd like to go?
Yeah, so our process, again, is pretty transparent. We have admissions counselors that are working with our incoming students, and anytime students bring up a concern about that, we send them an appeal link essentially to go in and complete. So we have a very structured process. I mean, it's very transparent, but it typically starts with the front door of an admissions counselor or someone that the student's connected to on the way in, communicating that there's not necessarily financial concern, but a desire for an appeal. And so they can submit the appeal through that structured process.
Okay, so their point of contact is the admission rep who's tied to their basically geographical region or high school or whatever.
Yep. Yeah. So all of our admissions counselors are based on region. And so it's something that not all students will know about, but inside their portal when they come into OU, they can see like who is my person. I mean, that's an easy contact point. And obviously, if you don't know your person, it's always reaching out to the general admissions email as a way to get connected.
And I think for other schools, I think that's great that you guys have it structured and there's a specific person. I always tell families, like, you should get to know that admissions rep if they're in your
Hmm.
area, because then there's a face to a name on the admission side. But we always say that that's a great person to reach out to for you guys. That's part of your process. But that's a great person to reach out to and say, hey, I'm wanting to do this. And then the person can give feedback on, this is how we work. This is the best way to do it. You can try it, but it might not be successful. Your GPA, whatever the
Hmm.
person says. For you guys, that's the only way to go. But that's a good pointer just for any school to like hit that admissions rep with your questions, the student, to see how to do that. And it brings up the broader point that all schools, they have their process when you're appealing on both sides. Follow the school's process, because if you don't, you're not saying there's a certain form, Mike, but if you don't follow the process, then they could come back and say, thank you for that email of appealing, but that's not our process. And then the family, you're back to like kind of doing it all over again. So and unfortunately, not all schools are the same. So it's a bit of a process to do that. So, okay. So do you think, just even compared to the schools like in your direct competing schools, are the processes pretty similar, do you think, or do you think there is a wide gamut?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a wide gamut. At a conference I was at about a year ago, we were having some conversations about this. And as we were going around the table, it seemed like everyone had a slightly different process.
Yeah.
And so when you think about this process and how it can be overwhelming and daunting, I think, you hit on one of the points I was going to share is really get to know your admissions counselor, that front facing person, where you can inquire, ask questions, get to know more before you appeal, but also what is the appeal process? Because making sure you're following those steps that are in alignment with their unique process is extremely important.
Yeah, and just this isn't appeal oriented, but I think this is good for you to share. All these automatic merit scholarships that you were talking about, they're automatic, but is there anything that a student should know? Like, oh, well, I have to meet a certain deadline so that I'm considered, or are they just considered no matter when they submit their completed admission app?
Yeah, we typically say for guaranteed scholarships, apply by December 15th. Occasionally that will get pushed back, but ultimately we will award through April 30th. So the May 1st commit deadline, we're awarding through that point. So making sure as a student and a family looking at what are the timelines. We have that posted all over multiple websites so that we, again, try to be transparent and communicate that out. But yeah, the deadline for us, when we think of priority, is December 15th. But
Yeah.
ultimately, for those merit scholarships, April 30th, you're still going to be fine to receive those.
Yeah, but I think it is good practice if you can make it work in your household with your child. Early action deadlines. Then if you make those, it keeps the process going. Your kids get in sooner. If you have a school like, because you're saying it's not a okay, you're not getting it after December 15th if your app isn't in, but some schools can be much more stringent. And so then you don't have to worry about, well, how does OU do it versus such and such? If you can, that's what I did with my two. I'm like, you are doing EA if it exists, get your act
Mhm.
together, get it all done. And that means recommendations, test scores are sent. It's not just like the Common App or whatever application you're filling in. So that's
Yeah.
just kind of a nice little tidbit.
Yeah.
So,
And you bring up a good point. So December 15th for us is the deadline for those other merit based that aren't automatic. So if you think of like leadership based is a good one where it's, merit based or community involvement, those that is the deadline. You need to make sure to meet that. Where our merit tuition waivers are, if you hit it, you're going to get it. So a December 15th deadline is, one that we always encourage students to stick to, because those other ones that aren't automatic will come from that pool of students.
yeah, because the regular decision deadlines for the applications, the full, they can be like around now. And at that
Mm-hmm.
point, if you have a leadership one that was like, well, it had to be December 15th for that one, maybe not the other, then student is missed out. So it's just, especially if there's 10, 15 schools on a list, I mean, it's a lot to keep track of. So that's where there's a super early deadline at a school, like a November 1, that's a different story. But the EA, if you're not doing any ED, is a good one to shoot to. So before I get to my next group of questions, since we were talking about the admissions rep, if somebody's sitting here thinking, well, we don't have an admission rep, like I remember my kids were in school, way before COVID, like they would come, they'd have to get out of class and go to a session. How can, if they don't have a rep, say it's a smaller school or they're just not, they can't go to every high school, right? How do they get to know an admissions rep? Is there another way to kind of know them?
Yeah, it's that can be challenging. I think direct outreach to the person, because I think most schools are going to have someone, but you might never come across them. Direct outreach to that person can be helpful, but also just any kind of direct outreach to an admissions office, whether it be via email or phone call, being able to connect with a person and, again, inquiring, right? Not starting necessarily with here's what I need, but starting with a couple questions like, hey, here's my situation. What about this? What about this? Having them tell you what their process is, which might be, yeah, connect with your admissions counselor, or it might be, no, don't do that. They're busy. They're worked
Yeah,
to the
yeah, they're
T, and
traveling. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So getting to have that conversation, I think, is important, regardless of who is the initial starting point.
Yeah, and I don't know if OU does this, but again, remembering pulling from my experience with my kids, sometimes groups of schools, like 3 or 4, will get together and they'll do like this road trip thing, and they'll be in the Sheraton at Seattle and Sheraton in Boston, and that's another opportunity. One, it shows demonstrated interest, and you get information about these schools when you go. But sometimes the reps are there. So that's another opportunity to meet people. Sometimes those aren't the reps and they're higher up people, but that's another opportunity. So don't be stressed if you're like, well, there's no way for my kid to know the admissions rep. What Mike is saying, it's all good. I mean, the admissions reps, if they, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my guess is their job is to get kids from their region to go to that school. So they're aligned to be as helpful to a kid who got in, who wants to appeal and is really considering going. They're aligned. They want you to go to that school, right? Because they
Absolutely.
usually
Yeah, because
love the school and it's part of their comp structure. Right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, thinking about that from an admissions counselor perspective, it's like here's all these schools, all these territories, and you're just kind of going out there. And then if someone reaches out to you directly, it's like, well, I know they're interested because they're reaching out. Let me focus on them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now let's get into, in your mind, when somebody's submitting a merit appeal, what makes for a good appeal? And then we'll also talk about what are not so good appeals.
Yeah. So Again, backing away from just like the OU lens in general, thinking about a good appeal, I still think that connection point with an admissions counselor, whoever that person is really helpful because when you think about the structure internally within the institution, that person might be sitting on the appeal committee. But if not, that person might get to know you through a few interactions and they can advocate for you because most schools are receiving a ton of appeals. How do you separate those out? And relationships can be key in that part where an admissions counselor or someone can be like, hey, Peg is great. We need to have her at OU. Is there anything the appeal committee can do? Right. So having someone internally that can advocate for you through that relationship, I think is huge. And when we're also thinking of like letting them know what pieces of information do they not know? Has your circumstance changed? Is it unique? What don't we know about you? Uh,
What would
is
be an
something
example of one of those that you would say that's a good thing to share?
Yeah, I think sometimes it can be challenging situations that you've dealt with that lead to resiliency and grit to show I've overcome it. Or in the midst of like that happening, I was still in the leadership class for 4 years in high school, right? Because a lot of students on paper, you'll see certain, characteristics of leadership, community engagement, things like that. But was there something paired with that that makes your experience look a little bit more impressive? And also on the back end, these schools want you to come, but once you're here, they want you to be successful. So if you're indicating things that are key indicators we look at to say, oh, they're going to be successful or have the ability to be successful, that's great, right? We want those students even more, and they've demonstrated that early on.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess too, if they won some award or something after they
Hmm.
put in their app, and that's all merit oriented, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So what do you want? Who do you want to hear from if they're doing a merit appeal? Like what's a perfect process for them to follow, a family to follow?
Is having the student take the lead and go through the process. Something that we always want to see is the students leading the process, the students writing the appeal letter, the students communicating with OU officials and things like that. So the student needs to be engaged in that process. And you mentioned like demonstrated interest. I recognize there's times where families need to reach out on behalf of the student, but from a university's perspective, is the student really interested if they're not engaged like that? And that's another piece, Peg, that I was going to mention. Universities have a lot of pieces of information for students and families. So when we think of demonstrated interest, if they're looking at key data points, you haven't submitted your housing application, you haven't submitted this, you haven't submitted this, you haven't submitted, but then you submit an appeal, the university's like, does Peg really want to come to OU? I mean, there's an
Yeah.
appeal that, so
Yeah.
it being very intentional about like, I am interested in OU or whatever the school is and being able to show that I think is helpful for sure.
It's a very key. I'll just double down on that because that's some great insights from Mike here. Like, you guys look at that. Like, you're looking at if we give this student more money, or maybe we didn't give them any, but we give them some. And as we've talked about on the podcast, merit is almost always offered for 4 years. So if OU says, all right, we're going to up your merit by $3,000, that's $12,000 in your pocket and out of OU's
Mhm.
pocket. You're a business, right? You're a nonprofit, but you're business and everybody has their bottom line. So to your point, like if it looks like, oh, if you guys are feeling on the back end, well, this kid's probably doing the same appeal to 10 other places and they haven't, followed through
Mhm.
on anything else to show that they're serious about coming.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, and we're not advocating here for you to put a housing payment down on 10 schools,
Yeah.
right? So that it looks, but I think if your child is really excited about a given school, and you're going to appeal, we always tell people, if you've already put down your deposit, you have a little bit less leverage. Do you agree with that being on the back end?
Yes. Yeah, because it's kind of that middle ground of did a student do nothing, right? They don't look interested, or did a student do everything? They've paid this, they've done the application, they've paid their enrollment deposit, like they're coming. So you in my mind, you don't want to be on either end of that spectrum. You kind of want to be in the middle, right?
Yeah.
I'm showing the institution that I'm interested, but I haven't committed yet. And what does that look like then when they see that picture? They're like, Peg does want to come. Be extra $1,000 a year will move the needle for her financial plan to feel good about it.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You're like, you want to commit, But you don't want 100% commit. Yeah, but you want to at least show the school, yeah, I'm somewhat committed here. So I think that's great insight. So what would you say is like the big no-nos when you're appealing for mayor?
Yeah. The biggest no-no is a parent appealing, a parent taking the charge or family member taking the charge of that. It's got to be student led. Again, there's unique circumstances where maybe that's not the case, but that is very easy for, I think, committees to see that and kind of move to the next one. One thing that this might be more specific to OU, but like price match language, that can potentially be off-putting for certain universities. I think price matching can work well for private, but when we think of public not having as much funding, if you're coming in and saying, hey, Alabama's going to give me this much, can you match? Well, we don't do price matching. A lot of publics don't. So it's not saying that that's irrelevant information. But if you say Alabama's offering me this much, but I don't want to go there. I want to be a Sooner. I want to go to OU. My parents and I are talking about a financial plan that's viable, right? That's more compelling to a committee than just, hey, match me here, right? It
Yeah.
feels more relational. It feels more intentional. So I think that's a big component of don't just, hey, price match,
Yeah,
give me what
like
I'm
you're
getting from
buying a
these other places.
car, it's
Yeah.
not like, oh, the dealership, and that's what I always say, you're not buying a car. And I think that's a great thing also to tap an admissions rep on, like, how do you function at your school? Like, is that we're never going to take that into account, but we will take into account that you have extra leadership or another award or something. Or, I tell people all the time in our software, we have the whole database, and like there's a scholarship for 15 and then a year, and then there's another one for 18,000. A student could reach out and say, I know I'm a smidge off on my test scores for the 18,000, but if you could go up 1,000 and make an ask, I really want to come. And your language about, my parents and I with our financial plan, that would really help. Then that's
Mhm.
a little softer, right? It's just a little softer. So I think that's interesting. Some schools, like I know when Arizona and Arizona State, like I would play them off each other all day long because they're just so direct, and they just did it, right? But to your point, Alabama's sitting there with their automatic scholarships as well. And yeah, I can see that's very interesting insights around that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've seen a lot of appeals. So if you could share, obviously no names and all stuff, but a couple examples of like really good, were there any like clever ways that people did it that really like you guys on the committee were like, whoa, this is really, creative/authentic, and it just, caught your attention and was a successful appeal because of.
Yeah. You mentioned that, and I thought of one just now that I hadn't been thinking of, where there was just a very, very clever student that wrote up a hilarious appeal, but it was mixed with humor, and then there was, detail around it of a reasonable ask. And I think that one stands out. Uh, in terms of uniqueness, we've never seen one like it. Like the committee was laughing. It showed the creativity of the student, right? Which is also like they used humor, but it's like creativity is extremely important when you think about higher education and being successful. So it was a
Yeah.
really, really unique way of going about it. Now, I'm not necessarily saying create funny appeals, but it was just a kind of a unique example. But I think of one, and this is not at OU, but where I worked with someone as a CAP pro, and it was very successful, and it was making sure that the family circumstance had changed a little bit, so it wasn't 100% merit, but we were leaning the merit way while also showing kind of a change in financial situation, and that resulted in I think it was 34,000 a year extra coming from that. So it was we're very intentional about detailing out family changes, but also going back to not just, again, financial, but the academic component of here are my test scores and grades. You already have that. But what you don't know is my family situation was going through this for 4 years. And yet the student was doing this, the student was doing this. And I don't think the student was giving themselves enough credit. And so I was like, no, that needs to be articulated in this letter as well. Because again, all schools are going to see your GPA, your test scores, right? You have to send that in, but they don't know how you got there. And if you show, again, that full picture, what don't they know? then I think that's super helpful. And I feel like that was a big component of the win that we had on that one.
Yeah, and that's a great point is they see your good grades and test scores, but they don't know that your parents were going through a separation and a divorce. And it's like it was and it was hard. And I still, I had the grit. I had I was disciplined. And even with some of those struggles going on, I was still able to maintain my grades and got good test scores or whatever. Yeah, and so again, it's that background. You're creating that story. So I think that's a great point that people wouldn't think. They would just think more, did I get another award I can share or something? Whereas to your point, there could have been challenges during the high school years. Everybody's got stuff going on in their life, right? It could have been a
Mhm.
COVID thing where a parent had a
Mhm.
business and it got shut down and the parents went off kilter a little and the child had to navigate that and still keep up their grades. So that's a great nugget for people to think about that maybe never would. So do you have any examples? And you kind of said flat out, like if a parent's just doing it all, that's a huge turnoff.
Mhm.
Anything else that a student could inadvertently do that would just be like, that's kind of really hurting your appeal.
I think like demanding more money, right? And how that is articulated, I think it can look very different. So just making sure the language of not demanding extra money. But I think other bad ones is no compelling argument. I recognize you're appealing for merit, but where's your argument? Like there's nothing that we're
Yeah.
seeing to change the situation. And also just like no background given. So some that come in where again, we don't know if this is the case, but it seems like, are you fishing? Like, is this the same appeal you sent to 9 other schools and you're
Yeah.
just hoping one of them bites? Those typically are not going to be super successful just because they're not individualized. It doesn't show demonstrated interest towards the institution. Um, so I
It
think
just
those are a
seems
couple.
formulaic and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went when I was touring with our kids way back when. This was for admissions, and it was actually the Ducks. It was at Oregon, and we were in the little admission session, and they literally said, "When you send your essay, make sure you read the school that you put in your essay and change it to us." So, and Bill, my husband and I looked at each other like, "That's what they're doing." So obviously kids had done that, but same thing here, right? If you're writing an appeal and it just sounds like you're sending the same appeal, to LSU and, all of the same, Tennessee, it's like you guys have been around the block. You've read a ton of appeals. I think it's similar what you said before. What's coming up for me is like the essay, you want people to laugh, you want people to remember, you want people, and it's kind of funny, but when a student's writing an appeal for merit, it's the same thing. And I also tell them, like, don't overthink it. Just let your kids sit down and start writing what they feel and just let them be them. Because you guys will also be able to tell if AI writes it, if the
Yep.
parents chiming in a lot. Because a 17 and
Mhm.
18-year-old thinks and writes in a certain way, even if they're a very good writer. Um, and AI is different and parents are different, right? So, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Because there is that temptation, like, "Just let me do it." I never did
Yeah.
that, but, parents and they get stressed and they think that's the way to go.
Yeah.
Alright, well, this has been
I
great.
would also, Peg, sorry to interrupt.
No, no,
I'd
no,
also
go
jump
ahead.
in and say, on the other side of it, it also doesn't need to be a dissertation. Don't make it a 5-page immaculate paper because you are one of many students they're reviewing that week, and then they have to get to the next week's batch, right? So again, depending on schools, there's different processes, but most of them are going to have some kind of dedicated time to reviewing. So it doesn't need to be this super lengthy, appeal letter. It's get to the point of it while not leaving out any of the important details.
Yeah, grab your attention, grab the committee's attention, but yeah, if it's too long, you could see people just being like, "Alright, we're bailing," this is too much. So anyways, okay, well, I mean, I love having people on the podcast because I always learn, and I've got a couple awesome tidbits from you that make me better. So I appreciate that. So any just closing comment you want to make for everybody to listen? And just so everybody knows, I'm sure we have parents that have sophomores and juniors in high school, and that's great. And we might have some parents that have kids in school. I guess we should touch on that real quick about appealing while they're in school. But, this is a step in the process. So even if your child isn't doing this soon or now, hopefully you took some notes. You can always come back and listen to the episode again, but it's applicable to any parents that have, college-bound high school kids. Just real quick, I didn't even think of that when I was kind of planning this out in my head, but in college kids, do you ever, or maybe other committees entertain like, hey, I'm here, I got some merit, but having that conversation similar to what we're talking about today?
Yeah. There that's pretty common across the board, especially in like institutions, to have some kind of current student appeal committee. And that can look very different. So we actually have 3 different appeals committees, one for incoming and then 2 for current students. And so that process will change. But I think the important thing for people to take away is there's likely going to be some kind of process involved that you can walk through. And so getting to know now when you're a current student, it's no longer that admissions counselor. Maybe it's someone from the student financial center. Maybe it's someone, we have the money coach office where they can talk to you about financial coaching. But whatever that person is at the school, help or ask questions that they can help guide you through if there isn't a process to appeal. Because again, like I mentioned, these schools want to make sure every student that comes can graduate and walk out the door, right? That makes the school look good. So if you're communicating, hey, I don't think I can attend anymore, and it's due to finances, the school is likely going to look at your financial situation and see, can we move the needle here, right? Because that's important to them.
Yeah, and if they can move it a little bit with merit because the student's a high flyer, that's a great point. Because retention, I mean, just to be blunt, like retention stats matter to colleges. They don't want you leaving. They want you to stay. They want to have good graduation rates, and they don't want to lose students to competitors either. So, they'll be aligned to have that conversation. So I'm glad I thought of that because that was good. I never knew, like, current student. See, that's another one. I wrote it down. Current Student Appeals Committee. I'm going to be quoting you on the webinars, Mike. Yours are going to be burning. So any like general, one kind of takeaway you want to share before we wrap up today?
Yeah, that's tough. One piece.
It
I
doesn't
think
have to be one, but
I think timing, it can be an important piece. We talked about applying early. So when you think of appealing, I think appealing in the appropriate window, which really is now until May 1st, I would say is the most appropriate time frame. When you're doing that, making sure you're thinking of that spectrum we were talking about of 0 interest to fully committed, I'm coming, right? I think
yeah.
that's a big piece of advice to just think about is your timing right? And how are you showing genuine interest in the institution can be a big piece. But I mean, we talked about so many different things today. It's hard to, I always want to revisit, like, don't have the parents do it. I think that's always a good piece of advice. I know we've said it multiple times.
That's good for parents to hear again. Don't do it. Don't do it. And don't look at your kids' thing and then rewrite it after they do it. Yeah. I know it's hard. And because parents, they want the best for their kids most of the time. So that's a tough one. Well, Mike, this was great. Like I said, I know everybody learned a lot. So this was really good to get the behind the scenes of you guys, but then in general, because I think a lot of components of what you guys do is probably true elsewhere. And just huge shout out to Mike. He is one of our pros. So we have hourly appointments. So he's a great guy. If you're looking, he can't do it if you're appealing to OU because there's an obvious conflict of interest there. But any other schools, if you're in our software, you can always book an hour or two with him. We do this. We're really in the season now. We help. We're constantly putting it in our internal Slack. And this morning there were a bunch more, 20,000 from here, actually, we've been around the block and Mike's been around the block. Plus he's like sits on the committee, right? So, let us support you in this piece if we can. We're more than happy to do it. And, Mike is an awesome resource that we're so excited to have. So, all right, everybody. Yeah, we look forward stay tuned for next time because then Matt and I are going to do the other piece. We're going to go deep into need-based appeals, which is a whole different animal. So we'll go into that next week. So sit tight for that. But Mike, it was great. It was great to actually see you. I haven't seen you in a while. So
I know. Same. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Absolutely. It was great. So, all right, everybody, we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, please follow us, share the show, and maybe even send it to a parent or counselor who you think would really enjoy it. I'm your host, Peg Keough, and I was joined by our special guest, Mike Hinderman. Mike is the Director of Scholarships at University of Oklahoma as well as a CAP financial expert. This episode was produced by the wonderful Eileen Campbell, and we'll see you back here next week. Matt will be back, and we are going to do a deep dive into need-based appeals. See you then.